Welcome, everybody, to Red Thread Podcast. I'm your host, Random Randy, and today we are going to be taking a look at yet another geological change, topographical change that has happened to our realm probably in the last few hundred years. So today we're going to look at Lake Parime. Okay, so Lake Parime is in the Amazon. Okay, it's a legendary lake located in South America. Uh, Reputedly the location of the fabled city El Dorado, also known as Manoa, a much sought after by European explorers location. Okay, so it's a Wikipedia is there to explain everything to you guys about the attempts at discovery, but we're going to jump into a thread and take a look and see what we find here. Okay. So there's a lot of weird situations going on, in the 17th century, 16th century, so on. Um, leading me to think that there was a, massive event or an ongoing set of events, much like the mining that we were talking about in the last episode. So let's take a look. Legendary lake located in South America. The search led explorers to map rivers and other features of southern Venezuela, northern Brazil, and southwestern Guyana before the lake's existence was disproved in the early 19th century. Okay, so one of the theories is that the lake did actually exist and was drained abruptly in June 1690 when an intensity 9 or violent earthquake opened up a bedrock fault, forming a rift or a graben that permitted the water to flow into the Rio Branco. Okay, so here's an example of one of the maps, and there are several that show this lake sitting right there in Guyana. Okay, and man, it's super interesting stuff. So let's just chip right on into it here. All right, allegedly, this lake is in the northeastern quarter of South America, was very well mapped, quite nicely measured as well, showing a maximum length of 250 miles and a width of 50 miles, okay, a depth of 120 meters, okay? So there's some interesting stuff when it comes to the narrative here. Sir Walter Raleigh began the exploration of the Guianas in 1594 and described the city of Manoa, which he believed to be the legendary city of El Dorado, as being located on Lake Parime, far up the Orinoco River in Venezuela. All right. Much of his exploration is documented in his books, The Discovery of the Large, Rich, and Beautiful Empire of Guyana, first published in 1596, and The Discovery of Guyana and the Journal of the Second Voyage there too, published in 1606. Okay, and so that's before the event that may or may not have happened in the middle to late 1600s. So, of course, how much of this work is true and how much is fabricated remains unclear, much like pretty much everything that we're given. Now, Raleigh says the lake that he was assured by the Spaniards to have seen Manoa, the imperial city of Guyana, which the Spaniards called El Dorado. Okay, massively wealthy area, and this kind of amount of gold was just exceeding that of any in the world. Right, it was a lake of salt water, about 200 leagues long. According to Raleigh, the lake itself was the source of the gold possessed by the people of Manoa. Most of the gold, which they made into plates and images, was not severed from stone, but on the lake of Manoa. And in a multitude of other rivers, they gathered it in grains of perfect gold and in pieces as big as small stones. So that's something to keep in mind, when we're talking about mining and what lakes, may be as far as like a dump, right? So, people before come in, take out the largest stuff, dig up, the richest veins, and then they leave the waste piles like we were talking about in the last episode, and then bring in a population to sift that stuff out of the remnants right after they've brought it either to the surface or whatever the case may be. Now, there's some very interesting stuff pertaining to this lake and this city of gold. Okay. And, we'll get into some of the landscape as it currently is here in a little bit. Now, as a result of Raleigh's work, maps began to appear depicting El Dorado and Lake Parime. One of the first was the elder Jodocus Hondius's Nieuwe Kaarte van het Wonderbaar en de Goedrich Land Guyana, or the new map of the wonderful and something land of Guyana, all right, published in 1598. His map depicts an elongated Lake Parime south of the Orinoco River, with the majority of lake positioned south of the equator, and with Manoa on the northern side, towards the eastern half of the lake. Manoa is noted as the greatest city in the entire world. Okay, and this map was copied by Theodore de Bry and published in his popular Grands Voyages in 1599. When Hondius published a completely revised edition of Mercator's Atlas in 1608, it included a map of South Africa featuring Lake Parime, with the majority of the lake located south of the equator, and with Manoa, again, along the northern shore, although not quite so far east. So there are several maps depicting, including, here's just a few, okay, 1587 Urbano Monte map, 1598. And I mean, this goes on all the way up until about 1780. So let's take a look at the 1780 map real quick. And, oh, no, never mind. It's showing me over to the Wikipedia page. So let's get down to that map here. Okay. 1650, still showing. 1739. This is the 1707 map here. Okay. So we still see Lake Parime here. Okay. Parime Lago. Okay. What's very interesting about a lot of these maps is, check this icon out, guys. These are the Jesuit maps. Okay. So these are what they were using to find these places, or tell each other where these places were. And very interesting stuff. Look at all of the civilization, cities, towns, all along these rivers and lakes. Just incredible, incredible stuff, right? Massive amounts of towns and cities all throughout the Amazon, which, we are not seeing anything near this today, right? So let's jump back over here. One of these maps is incredibly interesting. Apparently, they couldn't find an unfolded version, but it has Manoa, Maraguari, and I don't see the lake on this map itself, which is interesting. Now here's a rendition of what Manoa Odell Dorado may have looked like, again on the north side of the lake. Something interesting to note is all of these folks over here sort of removing something from the landscape and taking it down to ships here. Okay, there's a lot of notations in the literature about there being many gold mines in this area. So, this ties directly in with what we're looking at in the mines. So let's break through the story here of in 1896 Macmillan's magazine. We will give the story of this first and only visit to Manoa in Raleigh's own words, but not in his own spelling. Martinez, as has been said, was master of the ordnance to Ordaz, and the powder provided for the expedition having by his negligence been set on fire, he was condemned to death by the general on the intercession of the soldiers. However, capital punishment was remitted, and Martinez was set adrift on the Orinoco in a canoe with his arms, but without any food. All right. It pleased God that the canoe was carried down the stream, and that certain of the Guianans met it the same evening. And having not at any time seen any Christians, nor any man of that color, they carried Martinez into the land to be wondered at. And so from town to town until he came to the great city of Manoa, the seat and residence of Inca the emperor. The emperor, after he had beheld, knew him to be Christian, for it was not long before that his brethren Hasquar and Atahualpa were vanquished by the Spaniards in Peru and caused him to be lodged in his palace and well entertained. He lived 7 months in Manila, but not suffered to wander the country into the country anywhere. He also brought there all the way blindfolded, led by the Indians, until he came to the entrance of Manila itself, and was 14 or 15 days in the passage. He avowed at his death that he entered the city at noon, and then they uncovered his face, and that he traveled all that day till night through the city, and the next day from sunrising to sunsetting, ere he came to the palace of Inca. After that, Martinez had lived 7 months in Manila and began to understand the language of the country. Inca asked him whether he desired to return to his own country or would willingly abide with him, but Martinez, not desirous to stay, obtained the favor of Inca to depart, with whom he set divers Guineans to conduct him to the river, Guineans to conduct him to the river of Orinoco, all laden with as much gold as they could carry. He gave Martinez at his departure. Okay. But when he has arrived near the river's side, the borders, which are called Orinoquoponi, robbed him. The borderers, so like the border agents, robbed him and his Guineans of all the treasure. The borderers at that time being at war with the Inca and not conquered, save only 2 great bottles of gourds, which were filled with beads of gold, curiously wrought, which those Orinoquoponi thought had been no other thing than his drink or meat or grain or food, with which Martinez had liberty to pass. And so in canoes he fell down by the river of the Orinoco to Trinidad, and from thence to Margarita, and so to St. Juan de Puerto Rico, where remaining a long time for passage into Spain, he died. In the time of his extreme sickness and when he was without hope of life, receiving the sacrament at the hands of his confessor, he delivered these things with the relation of his travels, and also called for his calabash or gourds of the gold beads, which he gave to the church and friars to be prayed for. This Martinez was he that christened the city of Manila by the name of El Dorado. And as Barrow performed me upon this occasion, these Guineans and also the borderers and all others in that tract which I have seen are marvelous great drunkards, in which vice I think no nation can compare with them. So that's kind of interesting in itself. You know, we talk about South and Central America having some issues with morality, right around the time that the Spaniards kind of conquered them. So that's interesting in itself. And at the times of their solemn feasts, when the emperor carouseth with his captains, the manner is thus: all those that pledge him are the first stripped naked, and their bodies anointed all over with a kind of white balsamum, by them called curkai, of which there is great plenty, and yet very dear amongst them. And it is of all others the most precious, whereof we had a good experience. When they are anointed all over, certain servants of the emperor, having prepared gold made into fine powder, blow it through hollow canes upon their naked bodies until they have been shining from the foot to the head. And in this sort they sit drinking by 20s and hundreds, and continue in drunkenness sometimes 6 or 7 days together. So, man, these guys were party animals, right? The same is also confirmed by a letter written into Spain, which Master Robert Dudley told me he had seen. Upon this site, and for the abundance of gold which he saw in the city, the images of gold in their temples, the plates, armors, and shields of gold, which they use in wars, he called it El Dorado. Okay, so there are some inconsistencies on maps. Here's a couple of examples. One showing it like the northwestern side, one showing it on the northeastern side. Okay. And, a lot of people will be like, well, this is just BS then, if they're showing in 2 different places. Now, some of these maps being, 100 years apart, and, like we're talking about with the mining, they move stuff around, with the amount of manpower and possible, technology they might have had, it may not be such a stretch to think that they couldn't possibly float these cities. I've seen some images of them floating entire buildings, sometimes, as large as temples and things like that. So very interesting stuff. Or was it a possibility that maybe there were more than one city here, kind of, overseeing this mining operation going on? Now, so there's a ton of information from the 17th and 18th century on this Manoa city. And, go to Google Books and you can just type in Manoa and it'll pull up a lot of this information. Okay. So Let's read through this discovery of Guyana excerpt. I know not, but Moroquito for a time dissembled his disposition, suffered Spaniards and a friar, which Berreo had sent to discover Manoa, to travel through his country, gave them a guide for Macurigari, the first town of civil and apparelled people, from whence they had other guides to bring them to Manoa, to the great city of Inga, and being furnished with those things they had learned of Carapana, were most prized in Guyana, went onward, and in 11 days arrived at Manoa. As Berreo affirmed for certain, although I could not be assured thereof by the Lord which now governed the province of Morquito, for he told me that they got all the gold they had in other towns on this side, on this side Manoa. They're being very, very great rich, as you said, built like the towns of Christians with many rooms. Okay. So it goes on to speak of this golden king in Peru and this diverse people. Apparently not very many of them, only 250 men. They're all idolaters, and they obey chiefs, the ancient chiefs of their families. For relations affirm that they are Amazons in those parts, or rather large-sized women that wage war with much skill and valor, insomuch that the natives of the Isle of Erewhon at the mouth of the Amazon have acquired that name by reason of their long hair. The fame relations ever that are some nations where the men exchange their wives, and where the men always choose the most elderly as being more industrious and better experienced in housewifery than the young ones. Manoa, near the Lake Parime, the principal city of Guyana, is called El Dorado by reason of the quantity of gold which they say is there, so great that the inhabitants make their weapons of it and clothe their bodies in it after they've rubbed themselves with oil or balsam. So like we were saying a minute ago, they apply gold powder to themselves. So this city may be accounted as the richest in the world if there is such a one. All right. So, and later on, in 1806, they've got another rendition of the life of Sir Walter Raleigh, and in this one it's called New Dorado. Okay, and basically stating that a frigate came down bringing the portraiture of a giant, all of gold and weighing 47 quintals, which the Indians held there for their idol. So you see how these natives are relating to these larger folks as gods, basically, and idolizing them. So, but now admitting of Christianity and obedience to the King of Spain, they sent their said idol unto him in token they were becoming Christians, and held him for their king. The company coming in the said frigate reported gold to be there in most abundance, diamonds of inestimable value, and with a great store of pearls. All right. And it goes on, a couple different stories of New El Dorado. All right. Reports of certain merchants of Rio de Hacha concerning El Nuevo Dorado. They said, advancing the king's great treasure in the Indies, that Nuevo Reino yielded very many gold mines and wonderfully rich, but lately was discovered a certain province so rich in gold as the report thereof may seem incredible. It is there in such abundance that it is called the New Dorado. And Antonio de Barro made the said discovery. So this is referring back to these same people. So we have, it appears we have literature going on through time, whether or not that's really the case or whether these were just all manufactured after, we really don't know, but it's very interesting to say the least. So let's look at the location on today's map of where Lake Parime may have been. And what do we know? We see some stripped lands up here, where in previous maps we saw mountains, right? And there are more maps on the Wikipedia, but anyway, okay, so we see some interesting geology changing here, right? And again, this is today's, so all of this is covered in forest, so we can't really get a good view of what's going on here, but we do see these very bare areas up here. And, again, go back and take a look at the mining episode that is out and, see what you think. All right. Can you put it past the past, you know, our predecessors, let's say, uh, to be able to mine and, extract precious metals from the earth to such a degree that they then leave bare areas that will not grow forest? It's interesting stuff. Now, see, here's an example of some of the mountain ranges that were shown on these older maps, which are gone now. Gone. Okay. So there's some major geological changes happening, whether natural or not, is kind of aside from the point. But, very interesting stuff, right? This particular map doesn't have the town sitting up here, the city, right? But it does have these lakes. Okay, so where did the lake and the city go? Now, there's some interesting stuff when it comes to hybrids, right? As we know, there are no longer any humid anything hybrids, as far as we know, as far as we're allowed to know, in this realm anymore. Okay, does that mean that something happened where these groups, the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, right? Jebusites, Jesuits, all right, as the Lord God commanded them, went and destroyed all of these people? It's very possible. Okay, this is what's known as a blimey, a headless creature. Okay, various species of mythical headless men were rumored in antiquity and later to inhabit remote parts of the world. They are variously known as the Acaphaloi or blimies, and described as lacking a head with their facial features on their chest. These were at first described as inhabitants of the Nile system. Later traditions confine their habitat to a particular island in the Bryson River or shifted it to India. So we see a lot of that going on with the narrative. A lot of things being shifted to other areas, kind of a nope, look over here. Don't pay attention to the origins of, these things, these places, these peoples. All right. Blimies are said to occur in two types, with the eyes on the chest or with the eyes on the shoulders. All right. Epiphagi, a variant name for the headless people of the Brazone, sometimes used as a term referring strictly to the eyes on the shoulders type. Now, Brazone, Brazil, kind of a similar, etymology, or rooting of the word there. Okay. So it's very interesting stuff. On a lot of these old maps, we have these beings portrayed in these areas. So it makes sense that they would be like, no, listen, you guys need to look over in India for these guys, right? Where you're not going to find them. Okay. Something else to note is this is the ancient Alexander the Great, right? Looking very much like a medieval knight in this 1445 depiction. Something else to note is look at the size of these beings, right? So incredible stuff. Now, there's an interesting piece of information when it comes to the sound Ra, right? We know of this as being an Egyptian sun god, right? Now, there's many places in Guyana that have this prefix or suffix within the word. Roraima, Caracara, Aracima. Okay. Now, Roraima today is in the northernmost and least populated state of Brazil, located in the Amazon region. It borders the states of Amazonas and Para and the countries of Venezuela and Guyana. The population is approximately 450,000 in 2010, and the capital is Boa Vista. Roraima is the Brazilian state with the fewest municipalities, 15 in total. And, again, I'll point out, look at the change in geography here, where we were shown kind of mountains before. They're all kind of flattened, right? And I'll show you some examples here in just a moment. In fact, let's take a look at Mount Roraima. Very, very incredible stuff. Okay. Now, this is known as the House of the Gods, Mount Roraima. And you can see why. This is another flat top mesa, very regular in structure. Okay, sitting right above the clouds. And what do we know about the lands of the gods They were all above the clouds, right? And of course, $2,500 to go and hike this for 9 days. Another interesting point is there are springs up here, aquifers that then cascade down the sides in waterfalls. Okay, so just something to point out, some very regular sort of structures within this. Now, there's some interesting stuff when you look at this well in the middle at the top there, right? We see some very pillar-esque type of things going on, some very, decimated looking areas up top there, right? Look at that, massive mountaintops. Incredible stuff. A lot of, stripped rock, what has happened up here, right? And again, this was known as the land of the gods, or the house of the gods, rather. Now, when you get up to the top, you find things like this. Hot springs, some kind of wasteland looking areas, right? Some really incredible structures that we're told are made by erosion. Again, some very regular, almost looking like brickwork or purposefully laid stone, right? Very interesting stuff going on up here. And this was like the kind of inspiration for the book, the original book by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, The Lost World. Okay. Look at this, guys. So we see a very similar thing that we see happening kind of in a lot of places around the world with these bubbles. We'll call them bubbles, right? Looking very much like something melted this entire area, the highest mountain in Guyana. Incredible stuff. I mean, this place is just amazing looking. I would love to go there. It would be amazing. Now, let's take a look at Tepui. Tepui is a tabletop mountain or mesa found in South America, especially in Venezuela. So this is talking about a type of mountain, okay, that is especially found in Venezuela. The word Tepui means house of the gods in the native tongue of the Pimon and indigenous people who inhabit the Grand Sabana. Very, very interesting stuff. And so this is it gives you an idea of where these tabletop mesas are. Okay. Steep rock walls. So if you were living down here and, there were a people living up here, you really couldn't get to them, right? You just couldn't. Look at these beautiful waterfalls coming down. So, opens up a lot of questions as to what was going on here. Was this just kind of where the governing, people stayed as the other folks were down here kind of mining? Was there mining happening up here at the top? What, causes this spring to flow up through this mountain? Much like, many tabletop mountains. That was really strange. That was a little weird. Anyway, maybe I'm onto something, right? But anyway, moving on. So here's some Roraima area ruins. We're told these are ruins. And something that I'll point out is when you have things called slag heaps, right, coming from the waste of smelting and melting things, you might wind up with some piles like these, very high in quartz crystal. And remember, we were talking about the nanoparticle consolidation into, reconsolidating into crystals and things like this. So is there a natural process happening here that allows for this kind of change to happen? Possibly, right? A couple hundred miles north from Lake Parime. Very regular looking kind of structures. It's just interesting, to say the least. So, I just wanted to point that out and kind of point out that this is not something that's happening, in just one place, like around the world. Let's take a closer look at some of these maps that we were given some links to up here. And, you can kind of make your own decision on this. But, again, look at these cities looking very medieval with domes and spires and antennae and so on. So it's incredible stuff. And, let's take a look at the Urbano Monte map. That's a good one. It's a lot of fun to look into this map as it shows the entire essentially known world, right? Here we go. Now, this is a different version than I've seen. So we're going to look at just the area of Peru. Got some interesting sort of creatures out here. Very different landscape, right? Paria, Rio Grande. So, it's weird to say the least, some of the stuff going on here in this map. Let's look at this next map here. Oh, of course, it's going to send me to the Wikipedia, but there we go. Showing different creatures in Guyana, the Amazonian women, right? I'll give it a second to pull up here. Right, so we see the lake, we see the city here. We see that secondary lake up here near those mountains in the north. Okay. Incredible stuff. So, on these maps, let's look at the 1707 map. Boo, boo, boo. And this is that Jesuit map we were just looking at. So are these fake, right? Are these falsified? Or are these what the missionaries, we could call them, were using to find these areas, these lands of gold and things of that, right? Something interesting is this is the North Sea, right? The northern South American Sea here. And the name itself, Manoa, is supposedly to mean big lake. But I think that maybe that's, a misinterpretation. Perhaps it just means the northern lake, right? So that's just a little bit there on this, and I'll include a link to this thread so y'all can take a look at it and see what you think. You know what I mean? See what you think. And we'll throw this up on YouTube also. So if you have any comments, go over there. The channel is called At Random Facts. So go take a look over there, guys. And just question absolutely everything, and of course be vigilant, and do your homework, look into some of this stuff. Of course, we're not going to get down to brass tacks immediately, but at least we are. Of course, that light wants to pop on by itself again, so that's interesting, right? I feel like I'm onto something when when things like that happen. It's just strange to say the least. But I want to thank you for tuning in, and you all have a wonderful and fruitful rest of your day and on your journey. Thanks for tuning in.